Hi, welcome to Sharon Silk Studio, and today we're going to be showing you how to iron silk onto freezer paper so that you can easily have your students paint it. So I buy my freezer paper at Costco in a big roll like this, and I've got a nice cutter for it. So I measured out the length of the silk and then go ahead and cut that off. Your freezer paper has two sides to it. It's got the shiny side that has the plastic coating on it, and then it's got the paper side. So for an 8x54 scarf, this is 18 inches wide, so we're going to go ahead and fold this down the middle, and then open it up and cut it. If you're doing a large class, I like to cut a lot of these ahead of time so that I'm all ready to go. So we've got our paper cut and we're ready to go. Here's one that's already cut. We're going to bring it over to the ironing board. So the most important thing to remember is to make sure that the shiny side is up, because that's the sticky side. On my iron, I have a silk setting, and I have set it to 2 settings higher than a silk setting. When you first start out, you might want to just try it on the silk setting and then warm it up depending on your iron, but it needs to be a little bit hotter than what you typically iron silk at. This is a flat crepe scarf, so habotai or flat crepe. The instructions would be about the same. When you do this the first time, you might consider ironing your silk first. It's a little bit easier when you iron it first. I'll iron just a little section so that you can see. Put my steam on. And then it just makes it a little bit easier to get started. But then after you've got some practice, then it's just an extra step to iron it ahead of time, so I usually don't. When you iron it, if you're going to iron it before you put the silk onto the paper, then you want to have your steam on. But when you're ready to put the silk onto the freezer paper, turn your steam off. So you'll start at one end. Make sure that your silk has the seam side, if it's a scarf, has the seam side down. If it's not a scarf and just a piece of silk, then whichever side looks like it's the top side of the silk. One of the important things to remember with this is you don't want to touch the freezer paper or touch the iron to the freezer paper. This is my good iron, but I do have a craft iron that I typically use for this. But I'm usually really careful now because I've been doing this so many times. So you'll just start out by pushing the silk to the edges of the freezer paper. And then you want to test it to see if your iron is the right temperature and if it's sticking the right way. That's about right. If you can't pull your silk easily off of the freezer paper, you'll need to discard the silk because you've ruined it. So it's very important to not start with too hot of an iron. But if it doesn't adhere to the freezer paper, then either you've got your freezer paper upside down, and you should check to see if it's sticking to your ironing board, or you don't have your iron hot enough, or your steam may be on. I like to go back towards the end of the scarf with the back square end of the iron to get that adhered nicely there. And then I'm going to just push it from one side, and then I'm going to push the wrinkles out over to the other side. If you end up with a wrinkle in the middle while you're doing this, then you'll want to pull it off just back to that point and start over. Now I'm going to move forward. And this is the part that I hadn't ironed yet. So I'm going to start by putting my iron down the middle And then I'm going to move it over to one side to push the wrinkles out there. And then I'm going to go back and move it over to the other side and push the wrinkles out there. So just continue this way down your scarf. And try to keep your scarf straight and in the center of the freezer paper as you go down. Now, typically, I snip off the scarf labels. You have to be really careful when you do that because the sometimes when they've hand rolled and hemmed this, they have used the same thread and sewed this tag in there. So what I do is I cut it off really short and then pick out the little pieces so that you're not cutting that thread, because if you've cut that thread, then you're going to have to buy silk thread to redo the hem. And then when I get to the end, again, I'm going to turn my iron around so that I can get right up close to the corner. But be very careful you don't go off the edge like I just did there, because you can see there's some residue on the iron now down here. And you can take a cloth and wipe that off. But don't stick it back on the silk before you wipe it off the iron, otherwise you'll get that plastic residue. And that's it. So now our flat crepe scarf is on our paper and ready to be painted. And then I'll just show you quickly how I do multiple scarves at once. You can set up some boards. You can get them at Home Depot or a hardware store or something like this. This is 1/4-inch plywood, but I understand they've got some plastic stuff that you can use too. So I just take it and lay it on here. Since I go pretty heavy on my die and it often goes through the silk and the freezer paper to the backing, I don't want to get my boards all messy, so I tape a piece of freezer paper on there to start with. And then I'll just tack this down with some masking tape. And I like to tack it a couple of places along the way too, so it doesn't curl up on me. And then you can go ahead and paint it. This method doesn't work if you're using resist as a sturdy barrier, but you can use resist on this as a decorative finish, like with metallic resist or something when you're finished. And then I will show you one last thing. If I'm doing multiple scarves at once, or I've got a bunch of students and I've got limited space for drying, I take my little paint cups and stick them upside down here after I've finished painting. And then, when I finish my next scarf, I can just set it on here for drying. You can go about 6 deep with that. So that's today's lesson on how to attach habotai or flat crepe silk to freezer paper. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again. Bye now.